I want to introduce Susan LaMotte. She got her first W-2 at age 14 and hasn't stopped working or thinking about the way people work ever since. That's fantastic. And she is the founder and CEO of Exacquio, premier employer brand consulting firm, one of the Inc. 5000 fastest growing and most successful private companies. She's a pioneer in employer brand and a 25-year human resources veteran. And she's worked with a lot of companies, including Google, Princeton University, T-Mobile, CVS Health. She lives in Charleston, South Carolina with her husband and her two lovely children, and she is very passionate about being a working mom and a female founder. I'm going to introduce you to Susan LaMotte now. Welcome, Susan.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. It's great to see everybody and really excited to share and dig in today to our conversation today. All right, hopefully you all can see my screen. Today's focus is we kick off day 2 of our conference is building strong relationships, how feeling impacts hiring goals. Now, when we talk about feelings, right, everyone rolls their eyes, HR, touchy-feely, but let me tell you, feeling and emotion has never been more important. And let me tell you why. I can introduce myself this way, right? Short bio, Kevin shared, which is super kind. I can give you a little bit about me and you can say, okay, yep, Susan's been working in HR for a long time. Or I can share more. I can show you what it's like to do a family photo shoot with at the time, 4-year-old. If you've got a young son, those faces are probably not unfamiliar to you. Perhaps you connect with one of my universities or one of my clients, or perhaps you see one of my hobbies and think, oh, you like to be on the water. So do I. The point is that at the end of the day, the more we can share, the more that we can connect, the more likely it is that people are going to build trust in us, whether we're recruiters, hiring managers, HR leaders. And that's why it's really important to start to think about the next generation of our space, of candidate experience, of employer brand, and the role that relationships play. So I want each of you to pause and think for a second about someone in your life who is really, really important to you. So for me, of course, that's my husband. We've been together for 17 years. We have 2 kids. And the picture you see on the left is a picture of one of his offices. So a previous job that he had, he actually won an award for the world's messiest desk. Now, this is my office, as you see from my background, but also you see on the screen. So you can imagine we're quite different. You can imagine we struggle at home around who cleans, who doesn't. He's a free spirit. He finds exactly what he needs. He is very successful at work. So am I. We just have really different approaches to life. Now, in some cases, if we are 2 people in the world trying to interact and we have really different approaches to life, it's not going to work. But in other cases, it is because we connect on different things. Let me tell you what I mean. So many of you probably went and got coffee this morning, and maybe you went into your favorite coffee shop and you ordered your coffee. I take mine with oat milk. I like the little coffee shop that I go to, but if for some reason they stop serving oat milk, I'm going to say, hey, it's been great. Thanks for serving me. And I'm going to move to a coffee shop down the street. Because it's a transaction. They no longer can actually have the benefit to meet my need. I need oat milk. They don't have it anymore. That's called a transactional relationship. But when we think about something like a marriage, when we think about these most important relationships in our life, they're not transactional. We're not giving a benefit for a need. They're actually communal. What does that mean? It means that my husband sees that I had a really late night. I was up working, perhaps. I'm exhausted. And so he proactively brings me a cup of coffee upstairs as I'm getting ready for the day. There's nothing in it for him. He observes that I have a need and he meets that need because he cares about the relationship. For too long, we've been treating employment like a transaction. What does that do? It takes the feeling out of it. I saw someone post the other day that they're embarrassed that they used to be a recruiter who found victory in undercutting a candidate or in saving the company money because they were able to lowball a candidate. And they don't feel that sense of victory anymore. That's because post-COVID, post-social justice movement, in a time where the employment, sort of landscape we're working in is really challenging, we care about each other. Employment is not a transaction. Yes, legally, we have to refer to the employment contract. Employment is a relationship. How do we know? Because we have feelings and reactions to every aspect of our employment. Now, if you're a science geek, some of these things will not be new to you. These are the structures of neurotransmitters. Every time we have an emotion or a feeling, we react to it. We're scared, fight or flight. We're sad, we might try to find some dopamine or some adrenaline to deal with that sadness. Ultimately, we can't really get away from the science of it all. This is just how emotions or feelings work. And gosh, right now, with all the layoffs potentially going on, but also the job openings that still exist, there's a lot of feelings in our space. Now, for many of us, we feel all the time, right? We have feelings every minute of every day, but we don't know a lot about the science behind them. One of my favorite places to start is a site called Atlas of Emotions. It's actually backed by the Dalai Lama, who was looking to help people create an emotional journey. This is one of the screenshots from the site Atlas of Emotions. You can actually go on your own emotional journey yourself. But the idea is that it actually breaks down the emotions. You see the example here. You're, let's say a young child's playing football. They score a touchdown. The friend gets angry. The friend seems like a sore loser. How do you feel? Well, in some cases, the child might actually enjoy it. What does that mean? What does that happen? What happens after that? Now, you're probably saying, Susan, we're here to talk about candidate experience in recruiting. Why are you talking about feelings and emotions in a kid's football game? Because it's the same thing for us. We can no longer treat employment or candidates as part of a transaction or process. We have to remember every single thing we do as employers or recruiters or hiring manager, they're going to have an emotional reaction to. And how we address or treat that emotion, that changes everything. Emotion is actually a business. And our friends on the consumer marketing side, they've been dealing with emotions for a really long time. So when we look at the value of customers, for example, as you see this screenshot from a Harvard Business Review article, they're actually measuring the most successful companies are measuring customer value in terms of the emotional connection that their customers have. I used to work in human resources and talent acquisition for the Ritz-Carlton. And one of the questions we used to ask on the customer engagement survey was, can you imagine a world without Ritz-Carlton? Now, to many of us, that sounds like a preposterous question, right? But guess what that does? That gets at emotion. That gets at how we're feeling. And we can pull emotion not just to understand customer value, we can use it for other things like product development. This is an image of a customer journey through the wedding experience. So you see on the left-hand side, I got invited to the wedding. I'm so excited. Uh-oh, they're not allowing kids. I don't really have any babysitters. What should I do? So you can actually see the emotional journey that a guest goes on in terms of getting invited to the wedding and the wedding itself. Again, what does this do? This allows someone to react. So a wedding industry provider can look at this and react and say, oh, interesting. Maybe there's a business opportunity to provide local babysitting services at the biggest wedding venues. The idea is that we can better meet needs, not just when we identify the problem, but when we know how it makes people feel. So, how do we do this in candidate experience? Well, first and foremost, we've got to follow a journey. At Exacquio, we use our own employment experience model that follows the journey from understanding your company even exists all the way through that employment experience. And many organizations actually map this journey out. So you'll see this example here with James, what happens after he gets an offer, how his journey gets mapped out. If you're not mapping out candidate or employee journeys, this is a great place to start. You actually can't track emotion until you know what the journey is. Now, many of us are mapping out journeys, so we know what the key moments are that matter in that candidate experience journey or in the employee experience journey. So what do we do next? Well, this is an example of some of our work, redacted. I can't show you all the secret sauce of how we map journeys. So here what you see is an example of an employment experience journey. In the top left is part of that journey, which is belonging. Belonging is the last part of the candidate experience. We know that someone doesn't fully feel like an employee unless they actually make a contribution or impact to an organization. If you look down below, though, at the bottom, not only are we mapping that step, but we're also uncovering what is the candidate, now employee, thinking at that moment. And then based on their thought, what feeling does that bring about? Why does that matter? Well, when we know the feeling, then we know how we may have to react or act on it. So if we go back to the Atlas of Emotion site, you'll see this really cool visual example. Imagine that you're a recruiter, right? Many of you are. You give an offer to a candidate. The candidate comes back and counters. You have to say no, right? Budget set, or maybe you're a pay equity company or pay transparency. The salary is what the salary is. Now the candidate is resigned to make a decision, right? They have to do something. They know you can't negotiate anymore. You won't negotiate. How do they feel? So you see this example of that feeling of resignation and all of the different feelings the candidate could have. You might have a certain feeling, right? If someone gives you an offer, you try to negotiate and you get nowhere. You might feel ashamed. Oh man, I'm really bad at negotiation. I guess I should have done a better job. Or you might protest. Hey, look, I did all this research. Actually, you really should counter my offer or counter my counter back or whatever it may be. The point being, it's not about right or wrong here. It's about how do we look at the possible feelings our candidates could have, and then how can we be prepared to address them? There's nothing wrong with saying, what are you feeling in this moment? One of my favorite things to do is not to ask someone, how are they feeling, but what are they feeling? So as a candidate, as a recruiter, you can say to the candidate, I know it's hard that I can't go any further. I too wish I could move. We'd really like you to join the organization. What are you feeling right now? You'd be surprised some of the answers that you get. So how do we take all of these feelings and really start to define some targeted emotional connections? We can react in the moment, right? We can identify that the candidate's resigned to either accept or decline the offer because we can't negotiate anymore. But we can also be proactive and target specific emotional connections. How do we do that? We move away from looking at employment as a transaction, right? They're not buying a job. You can't just sell them a benefit or say, it's great to work here, right? What we really have to do is break that down and focus on the employment relationship. So at Exactwio, we talk about going beyond employer value proposition. You're not proposizing to them. You're not just making them an offer, you're building a relationship with them over time. Well, what does that look like? The employment relationship is actually broken down into 4 distinct dimensions. So every time a candidate is evaluating your open job, they're looking at the organization. Do I trust this organization? I just saw the CEO in the news. Do I trust them? They're looking at your leaders, right? I interviewed with my future boss. Can I respect that person? They're looking at their coworkers, right? I'm looking to my left and right. Who am I going to be working with in the office, on the line, in the store? And will they value me and what I bring? And do I value them? And then finally, do I care about this work? Do I think I can make an impact? Do I believe in this job? People are going to care about what I'm doing. So how do you translate this as a recruiter? What do you do with this information? Well, first and foremost, let's talk about the organization. Instead of making promises, instead of offering a value proposition, instead focus on the organization first. Why should your candidate actually trust your organization? And talk to them about what you're committed to as a company. What is your CEO committed to? And then actually share evidence of those commitments. You can say, our CEO is really committed to transparency because we want our employees to trust us. Let me give you 3 examples of that. I know, candidate A, you told me transparency is important to you. And you told me that when a company is transparent, it makes you feel this. So you can actually give them specific examples to do that. Now, as I said, they're also going to be looking at your leaders. Can I respect my leaders? So how do you actually create a relationship around that? How do you actually navigate and pull out those positive feelings? Have your leaders show up as human. Why should they be respected? So instead of them just saying, I'm the VP of software engineering, Make them human, make them talk about something that they feel comfortable sharing to, again, build that trust, but also really build that respect. Okay, I can respect you. You too are a working mom. You need breaks just like I do. You start to bring out those feelings, that sense of, okay, this is making me feel good. This is somebody I can respect and connect with. What about coworkers? How do we drive positive feelings there? Well, you've got to go beyond just, you're going to be working on a team of 10 and here's what you're working on, to really amplifying how that team will make them feel. When they join that team, what will it be like when they work together? What stories can you share? This is where your hiring managers come into play, right? When you're talking about posting the rec, when you're building out the plan to attract candidates, talk about the team and the people. What does it feel like? What are the emotions they're going to experience? Now, they might not all be positive. It might be a tough time, and that's okay, because then you can talk about if you're looking for a challenge. If you like a team that moves fast, works hard, it's going to feel tough. It's going to feel hard. We want you to know that going in. That's going to make it all the more successful downstream. And then finally, what about the work itself? Instead of just talking about the job duties, pointing back to the job description, saying, I know you have the experience for this job. I think you would do really great in it. Talk about the impacts, right? We know that there are specific human emotions connected to a sense of achievement. Talk about what they can achieve. Then you can drive those endorphins and they can start to feel really good about being in the job. This is the business of emotion, but it's also the science that's going to make you a better recruiter, and you are going to be more successful in getting your candidate than someone else might be. Now, of course, we also have to measure all of this. I can offer all of these opportunities, all of these suggestions, things you can do to really take your recruiting to the next level as you think about going beyond just the value proposition and selling a job to building a relationship. So we have to think about, how do we measure this? How do I prove to my recruiting leaders that this, in fact, is something I can really show the value in? That teaching recruiters about emotion and feeling is going to better our bottom line. Well, first and foremost, there are no shortage of emotions that exist. This is just a couple of examples of tweets I've pulled over the past year. The most recent one on the bottom, right? We know just even in the past 24 hours, Indeed has laid off 15% of their workforce. We don't know at the Fed's rate hike yesterday what actually is to come. People are feeling a certain way. So we know those feelings exist. Instead of ignoring them and saying, I got to press on, I've got to hire people, these jobs are really important, even though we're laying off people, I got to keep my job as a recruiter. I can't ignore these feelings exist. And guess what? Our friends in consumer marketing, they don't do it either. They measure emotion in many ways. So you can really actually measure first, are people attracted to a job? Many of you are already doing evaluations through either the talent board surveys, or you've got surveys on your website around candidate experience. Take it a step further. Start to measure that emotional connection. We can help you with that. I can. Send me a note. I'm happy to talk to you about how to do that. Because look at some of these differences here, right? Between the good brands that people consider, but do they actually have an emotional connection with that brand? Now, as we think about, as we think about how to do that, you can start to create a map for yourself. Across the top, you'll see the actual stages of the candidate journey. On the bottom, you'll see a number of ways to track who's progressing through that journey. Are they satisfied with their candidate experience? Now take it the next step. What are they thinking about at this stage? What are they feeling at this stage? How should you act? And how can you turn them into advocates? So I'll say it one more time. Track progression, right? Candidates going through the stage. Track satisfaction. What are they satisfied about at each stage of the journey? But then go to that next level. Track thinking. What are they thinking at this stage? How are they feeling? What actions should you take? And how can you turn them into advocates, or are you turning them into advocates? And then you can color code to use to measure where are you being successful and where are the concerns. And you can take that data back to your hiring managers and saying, hey, all of your candidates are feeling this way at this stage. This is why you're having trouble closing this job. And then it's not you complaining or trying to put the blame on someone else or the hiring manager putting the blame back on you. You have specific details and measures as to how you can do it. So I'm very action oriented. So as you think about this, thinking, feeling, emotions, these are all really big topics. They're a lot to consider. And also some of these things require a lot of stakeholders to get involved because they drive your strategy. So let's talk action. Regardless of where you sit in your organization, what are 5 things you can do right now? First and foremost, look in the mirror. Consider your own employment relationship. This is an excellent exercise for everyone to go through. And it's a really great team building exercise for your recruiters, right? So from an organizational perspective, what's your relationship like with your organization? Do you trust them? Right now, that's a really important question to ask because given what's happening in the economy, there's going to be really varying levels of trust. If your recruiters aren't trusting the organization, then what do you think is coming across to the candidates? Second, look at your relationship with your leaders, right? Do you respect them? Your hiring managers, do you respect them? Why or why not? Look at your relationship with your coworkers, your colleagues. Do you value them? That's a question that's often asked during potential layoff times, right? Is what's the value people bring? And then finally, look at your work. Do you feel like your work is driving an impact? Heck, if in a down economy, you're helping someone find a job, that's incredible impact. So maybe that part of your relationship right now is strong. Nonetheless, it's a great exercise to do as you think about your own career. Don't neglect yourself and your own feelings, because then it makes it really easy to turn to the candidate. Now, for years, when we talk about candidate experience, we've said, empathize with them, get in their shoes. I say, take it a step further. In this new era, right, we're somewhere we've never been before, go beyond just walking in their shoes, get in their hearts and minds. What are they thinking? How are they feeling? And what are their possible actions they could take? That's an easy 5 seconds before you jump on a call. If you're about to give an offer to someone, anticipate, what are they going to think of this offer? How's it going to make them feel? And then map out what are the things you should do based on their possible reactions. How can you react? That's a really great way to be strategic as a recruiter. I've been there. I started my career as a recruiter. I know it's hard, but that exercise takes all of 30 seconds to do, or a couple minutes in advance of a call. Start with one. You don't have to tackle thinking and feeling and the emotional connection for your entire business unit or function. Try this exercise with one candidate, as I suggest. Take that back to a team meeting and say, hey, I tried this out. Here's what happened. And then don't ignore tech. We know that our function, our industry is full of amazing tech in human resources and in talent acquisition. But don't start with tech, end with tech. Tech is not going to solve your problems. It's going to enable you to better connect with the candidate. If you find out through the journey that they're feeling a certain way, tech may not be able to solve the problem during that part of the journey. So it'll allow you to manage your resources better and bring in that human element when you need to. And finally, use that measurement opportunity. Get real results. It may seem weird to ask people how they're feeling, but there's nothing wrong with asking. They may not want to answer, but it gives you a sense of how people are feeling at a certain stage of the journey and really gives you an opportunity to then understand how to be proactive. Last but not least, don't forget the time that we're in right now. The screenshot that you see here is a survey that went out around kind of the last recession time, 07, 08, 09, that measured mental health. And you'll see some of the questions here. They're really tough questions. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting you ask these questions, but this is a survey that was done in Spain through the Spanish National Health Department in 2006 and 2011 to measure how people were feeling after some downturns in the economy there. And you'll see the power of how some of the recessions and things made them feel. The important thing to know here is that these emotions exist in the people you're talking to. They exist in our friends and family. They exist in the people around us. They probably exist in some of you too. This is a hard time. It may get harder. Don't forget that. This is why emotion and feeling matter. It's all over LinkedIn right now. We're telling emotional stories. Pause, make those one-on-one connections with your candidates and each other, because you never know how someone's feeling, and you might be able to change someone's day, even if you can't give them a job. I'm really excited about the future of where this is headed. We're really excited about moving away from value proposition and the idea of selling jobs and selling benefits and selling things like work-life balance, and instead building the true relationship in order to find people who will have a strong relationship with your organization. As always, it is such a pleasure and a privilege to thank Kevin, to thank Ron for having me today. And I'm happy to pause here, turn it back over to the staff of the Talent Board, and see if anybody has any questions. I've also put my email and LinkedIn in the chat of Huva, so please feel free if you've got questions to let me know. And I'm happy to answer them there, or you can reach me directly.
Susan, thank you so much. As always, a fantastic presentation, and this embodies, the great work that you and your team do at Exactio. One question that I have, when you talk a lot again about feelings, which is so important, in emotions, because we can't extract those things from the process across recruiting and hiring and everything that we do in the world of work. We know at the Talent Board, a key differentiator every single year are communication and feedback loops, right? So my question for you is, how do you recommend organizations really get focus on those and to somehow embed that personable, emotive nature in communication and feedback to keep them timely and consistent, but not just fully cold and controlled either? Do you understand what I'm asking? So what is a recommendation from you?
So what I would recommend you do is look at how many layers of feedback loops do you have? Many of us just have one, maybe two, if we get feedback from the recruiter level. So we might have a survey that we put out there that's en masse. It goes to everybody. It's the same set of questions. And then we might have the ability for recruiters to get feedback one-on-one. But what about those middle layers, right? Are you asking all your hiring managers to collect feedback? And then are you collecting that and sharing them that back? So you have collective feedback from all candidates about one rack, right? Are you asking business units to collect that feedback? And then what kind of feedback are you collecting? It's so easy to get feedback on the process. That's easy, right? To ask people, how's the journey through the career site? It's harder, but much more important to get feedback on how we made people feel, what they were thinking, and then what actions they took as a result. That requires both qual and quant. And I'm always happy to talk more about that offline.
Yeah, and we know that many are not shy to tell you how they feel about all the entire process. The other question I have that relates to the tech stack. So obviously recruiting technology is quite pervasive. It's definitely a big part of recruiting and hiring, especially on the front end of the process overall. What is a recommendation from you on, companies are always struggling with their tech stack too. So as it relates to what you were conveying today, what are key things that you recommend that companies think about to optimize their tech stack better to deliver a better recruiting and hiring experience?
Strategy. So what's happened in our space over the past 15 years as HR tech has gotten bigger and bigger is that we're using HR tech to solve our problems. And the reality is we can't just take a pitch that a tech vendor gives us and say, oh, great, they're going to solve this problem for us. In many cases, they will. There's some amazing tech out there, don't get me wrong. But unless you have a strategy, unless you know what problems you're trying to solve, and unless you determine what and who is involved in solving those problems first, then no tech is going to solve that for you. So start with strategy, start with people, start with stakeholders to figure out what the process is internally, then turn to tech and evaluate tech against that. Instead of just saying, we need more candidates, let's get some tech in here to pitch, because it doesn't help tech, right? They can't be successful without the problem solving. That's where that consultative nature comes into play. And happy to talk more about that too.
Excellent, Susan. Thank you so much. And real quick, we have time for one more question. I got my other computer to work, so that's good news. So many parts of employment feel legalistic and miss the important human aspect. I already do this on my own work and programs, but how to advocate for this to managers who do not agree with feelings as part of the decision making? Do you So the question is,
Yeah.
how do we get them on board, the hiring managers?
So, such a great question. First of all, kudos that you're already doing that yourself. The best thing you can do is a small pilot. Anytime you have skeptical stakeholders, do a small pilot and get the data and show them. And the best way to do this without incurring a lot of expense in the short term is use your new hires. Right? There's nothing to say you can't pull them together, do a small focus group, ask them how they're thinking and feeling, have them compare how you made them feel compared to other competitors that they looked at. Take all that data, share it back with the hiring managers. They get really antsy when they start to see that, maybe somebody feels better about competitors than they feel about you. And that data will be the best way to make the case.
Excellent. Well, Susan, thank you so much again. So appreciate you and everything that you shared. And everybody, thanks for attending today on day 2 of our virtual conference. And Susan, I hope to see you again soon in person.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.